So now let me move on to the second paper, parallel digital currencies and sticky prices. The presenter is Dr. Taojun. He is a senior research fellow at Asia Competitiveness Institute, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and US. So Dr. Xie, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you very much for having our paper in this session. It's a great pleasure to present this work here. So it's joint work with Harald from University of Chicago, and we are in the midst of revising this paper, so any comments will be very much welcome. Okay, so the motivation is that there's been increasing varieties of privately issued digital currencies like Bitcoin, and recently has just seen a surge in price, and also Ethereum, and we also have different kind of stable coins like US Tethers. So there have been a lot of papers or discussions on whether these kind of currencies can be used as medium of exchange or can be used as a store of value. So that pertain to two functions of money, which are medium exchange and store of value. And now in this paper, we are taking a slightly different perspective. We want to ask the question that what happens if firms use these currencies to price their products rather than using the official money? So recently, Tesla has been saying that they were going to accept Bitcoin, but in the end, they revoked this claim. But that shows a trend that it is possible for firms to actually sell their products in an alternative currency. So for example, a car can be sold for 1 Bitcoin instead of the company saying that the car was $30,000 US. Yeah, so that's the scenario that we want to investigate. And the approach that we use will be a simple new Keynesian model with multiple currency sectors. So in which of the sectors, firms will set in different prices, and that we are going to see what happens to the macroeconomic dynamics. So it's a short presentation, so I'm just going very quickly on the results overview because we are coming to this very soon. So the main finding is that the exchange rate shocks within this economy, when multiple currencies coexist, they will just arise without any other sources of uncertainties. And also because of stickiness in the price setting, the relative price between the different currency sectors become an important state variable in driving the macroeconomic dynamics, including the alpha gaps and also the inflation. And in this paper, we simulate a dollar depreciation, meaning the price of an alternative currency increase in terms of dollar. So that leads to a number of dynamics in sectoral level and also at the aggregate level. And it also depends on whether this monetary policy will target at the dollar sector inflation or targeting at the aggregate inflation. So, and then we also allows for endogenous currency choice when firms are free to choose their pricing currency when they're given a chance to reprice their products. Okay, I'll skip the literature because it's related to mostly new Keynesian economics. Okay, so the setup of the model is as follows. There are J currencies in total in the economy. Each has a money supply MJ. And so without loss of generality, we set the first sector to be the fiat currency sector, where all the firms in this sector will price in dollar, whereas in all the other sectors, they will price in any other of the parallel currencies like Bitcoin. So EJ will be the price of currency J in dollars. So in the sense of international economics, this is like an exchange rate between two currencies. Now within the same country, the price of currency J in dollar is also an exchange rate of currency J. So if you talk about the currency, the exchange rate between any two kinds of parallel currencies, it will be the ratio between EJ and EJ prime. Okay, now comes to firms. The firms in each sector will accept prices in currency J, but they also accept payments in all other currencies at the prevailing exchange rate. So we have a sectoral price index PJ, which is the average price from all firms pricing in the currency J. And also we have an aggregate price, general price index, which is pegged to the US. I mean, it's one-to-one exchange to the dollar, but we just convert it to the dollar terms and we compute the general price index. And also have a sectoral relative price, which describes how the prices change relative to the general price level. Okay, so this is how it's like in the model. So in the benchmark case, we have an exogenous sector allocation where we just impose that all firms in sector 1 will price in dollar, and it has a fixed sector size epsilon 1 or something. And then we have another sector that prices in Bitcoin, and we have another sector prices in Ethereum and so on. So all these sector sizes will be constant throughout the time, and then we see how the exchange rate dynamics will affect the macroeconomic dynamics. And we also have an extension of this framework where we allow endogenous currency choice, which means that when the firms are given the opportunity to reprice their item, they also have the option to change their pricing currency. They can change from the dollar to the Bitcoin, or they can also change from dollar to Ethereum. So there is a variation in the sector size whenever firms are given a chance to reprice. Okay, so this is the outline of the model. It's pretty basic. We have money utility where L is the liquidity, and we assume perfect substitutability across all the monies. So they're just a sum of all the liquidities. So in the budget constraint, they'll pay for consumption goods, buy bonds, and then hold some liquidities with interest from the bonds, and then we have a last period's liquidity and income from labor supply. So here is how firms set the prices. It follows the standard cowboy pricing model. With the only difference is that when the firms trying to price their items, they have to consider that when they when they receive payments from users of the other currencies, they have to consider the exchange rate dynamics in their profit function. So that differentiates us from the standard New Keynesian framework or sticky price model. And this will play a role in the macroeconomic dynamics. So here comes one of the first theoretical results, which is parallel to what Schilling and Uhlig found in their paper on simple Bitcoin economics. But here we extend it to any pair of the parallel currencies in the economy, which says that from the first order condition of the liquidity demand, we find that the exchange rate between any pair of the parallel currencies will be a random process. And also in the sectoral NKPC, the New Keynesian Phillips curve, we find that this relative price of the sector J to the general price level plays a role in determining the inflation in sector J. And at the same time, according to the law of motion of this relative price, it is affected by the inflation shock in the sector J currency. So this currency exchange rate shock doesn't arise from any assumption of the external any assumption of the economic uncertainties, but it just comes from the definition of the relative price. So if we put all these pieces together, we have quite a neat New Keynesian framework. Depending on the number of currencies, we have 2J plus 2 equation system, which gives the dynamics of the economy with multiple currencies. So output gap is as usual, it's a standard one, while the inflation, so this is a vector of inflation where the inflation in each of the currency sector is contained within this sector, this vector, which and then the relative price would be an autoregressive, which is subject to the exchange rate shock. So you see that there's a spillover effect from any of the exchange rate shock in the currency sector, because whenever a currency experiences whenever the dollar experiences a depreciation with any of the currencies in this vector, the relative price in every element in this, the relative price in every sector will change. So that means every element in this vector will change. That leads to the aggregate dynamics in the inflation and as well as the output gap. And if we If we do a sum of these elements in the inflation vector, we get aggregate inflation, which is also determined by the relative price in each of the currency sectors, as well as the currency shock, the exchange rate shock for each of the currencies. Okay, so I just want to touch on this homogeneity case, which is more straightforward given the time constraint. So the first conclusion is the same as what we see in Gopinath's paper on currency choice. We say that from different currency sectors, the optimal prices will be equivalent if they are setting in different prices and in different currencies. And the second conclusion says that this is given the bilateral relative price in any two currency sectors, the relative price will be an autoregressive process, subject to an exchange rate shock, and at the same time, it also relates to the stickiness of the economy. So the higher the value, the more sticky it is. So in this case, we see that if there's no stickiness, then this is the relative price will just be a purely random process. But otherwise, if it's sticky, then it becomes a more persistent process in the model. So also for the difference in any of the two sectors, I mean the inflation differential and also the output gap differential, they are both determined only by the relative price within this sector. So the relative price actually plays an important role as a state variable in driving the economic dynamics or the sectoral dynamics more specifically. Okay, so so when it comes to monetary policy, the important question is whether the monetary policy should target at the aggregate inflation or inflation in different sectors, given we have multiple sectors or multiple currency sectors in the economy. So in the simulation, we assume that there are only two sectors. There's a $1 sector, which is in which the money supply is controlled by the central bank, and there's also a non-dollar sector where we can lump all the digital currencies as one sector, and we simulate a dollar depreciation shock. And then we have three setups here. So in the first setup, the interest rate will respond to aggregate inflation and also aggregate output gap. We call it the AIAO. And then we also have interest rate responding to the dollar inflation and also the aggregate output gap. And the last model, we have interest rate responding to the dollar inflation and dollar output gap. So we simulate these scenarios and see how the economic dynamics changes. Okay, so the first one is the simplest case when the interest rate responding to aggregate inflation and aggregate output gap. We see that because we have a homogeneous stickiness in the two sectors, the aggregate economy is only affected by the initial exchange rate shock, and all the other sectoral dynamics has been absorbed because of the homogeneous stickiness. The firms are changing their price at the same speed, and therefore it can be cancelled at the aggregate level. So there's a very short run recession and inflation here. But at the sectoral level, we see that the dollar sectors will experience a higher output and it's persistent. This is because when dollar depreciates and the firms have not enough time to adjust their prices, the dollar sector goods becomes less expensive, while the goods in the non-dollar sector becomes more expensive. So there's a reallocation effect of the demand from the non-dollar sector to the dollar sector, and accordingly, the inflation will change. And we see that this changes, except for the first period where the exchange rate shock happens, the following period would just be a function of the relative price here. So you see the relative price is an autoregressive process, and also for the sectoral dynamics, they'll just change accordingly. So if you look at inflation and the interest rate responding to dollar inflation, and because dollar inflation is a sticky process as opposed to the aggregate inflation, and interest rate will also be sticky, or also be a persistent process. And we see that other than the first period's exchange rate shock, we see some persistence effect in the aggregate inflation as well as in the outputs. But the relative price will stay as the state variable here, determining the persistence component of these all these impulse responses. Okay, so here is a bit on the heterogeneous rigidity when the dollar sector and the non-dollar sector has got different price rigidity. Now we assume that the non-dollar sector is more flexible. So we see as the non-dollar sector gets more and more flexible, and the effect of the exchange rate shock disappear, because when it becomes a perfectly flexible price regime, then whatever exchange rate shock will be absorbed by an immediate change in the price of the non-dollar sector goods, as seen from this IRIF here. Yeah, and at the same time, if you see a differentiated stickiness, there's some persistence in the aggregate inflation and aggregate outputs. Okay, I'll skip these results, and because so this is one of also a more important piece of results, because we are trying to simulate a varying size of the dollars, the non-dollar sector. So we see that as the non-dollar sector increases, the impact of the exchange rate shock also gets larger. Okay, so at the last part of the paper, we discussed the endogenous currency choice, in which case we assume that the firms can also choose their pricing currency when they are given an opportunity. So we use McFadden's discrete choice model. We give a utility function for the firms, for a value function for the firms, and then whenever they are given a chance, there's a probability of gamma over all the sum of the size of the sectors to for the firms to switch from a currency J to a currency J prime if they find that the value from the currency J, the value from one currency sector is higher than all the other currency sectors. And then we have a law of motion for the size of the currency sectors. So as we simulate a change in the stickiness for each of the currency sectors, we see that when the dollar sector gets more and more flexible, it's surprising that the non-dollar sector will get larger. So it's because when firms are given a chance to reprice, the most flexible the sector is, the more, the easier that the firm it is to switch to a different currency sector. So that gives us the result that when a dollar sector gets more flexible, we'll see that the firms will just jump to the non-dollar sectors as their pricing currency. So with that, I'll conclude. So we are motivated by the increasing varieties of privately issued digital currencies, and we want to find out what happens if firms try to price in these currencies. So of course, this is a futuristic question. It has not really happened, but then who knows? It may happen in the future, in the near future. So we use a conventional or a simple New Keynesian model. We extend this model with multiple currency sectors and see what happens when the exchange rate shock arises. So we find that there is some dynamics, sectoral dynamics, when there is when firms price their goods in a sticky manner, because they do not have they have time to adjust to the changes, and therefore there are some persistent dynamics in the sectoral level. And at the aggregate level, it will depend on whether the monetary policy will target at the dollar inflation or at the aggregate inflation. And in the case of endogenous currency choice, we find that the less flexible sector will just increase the size substantially. So as there's a slight persistent aggregate boom and inflation drop, as observed from our simulations. Okay, so that's all, and I look forward to Pierpaolo's comments.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Xie. So now I'd like to ask Professor Pierpaolo Benigno of University of Bern.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this interesting paper. So I think it's an important paper that makes a step forward in the literature on interaction between cryptocurrency and government currency. So this paper is clearly motivated by the recent rise of digital currency, and this fact opens the avenue to understand how the rise of digital currency can create challenge to government currency and to standard monetary policy analysis. So as the author was emphasizing, the literature has mainly, I think, investigated the currency competition along the medium of exchange property and also store of value, but I think more on the medium of exchange property. And this paper instead, what is novel here, that it combines two properties of money, so the medium of exchange and I would call the unit of account, which is in the meaning that the currency in which producers set their prices. And even it does not necessarily coincide with the settlement currency. So it's a sort of invoicing currency. And so what are the two aspects here emphasizes? So when we are medium of exchange, so the model is, the framework is modeled in a way that there are multiple currency that provide the liquidity services in a perfect substitutable way. So that's the medium of exchange property. Then when we go to the unit of account, there are still the same currency, they are available and as an invoicing currency. And in the last part of the paper, which I think is very interesting and challenging also technically, is the invoicing currency then become also an endogenous choice. Okay, so those are the two properties that this paper investigate and they interact together. So that's, I think, is the beautiful thing here. So what are the results? So the first result, and which is common, when you have a perfect substitution between a pair of currency as a liquidity provider, then in this context, you find that the exchange rate between any pair of currency follows a random walk process. So that's a common result to the literature, but here it plays an interesting and key role also for simplification. I'm going to comment on this. Now, the second result emphasizes that the relative price between goods denominated in different currency becomes a state variable, in particular when prices are sticky in both currency. Then the third result is that these exchange rate shocks are non-neutral when they arise from a currency sector in which price adjustments are infrequent. So they affect monetary policy. And that's, I think, is the key aspect investigated here, how these shocks to exchange rate can affect standard monetary policy. So when we live in a world in which there is currency substitution, it's a different world. So monetary policy eventually, according to the result of this paper, should take into account this exchange rate shock. Now, in the last part of the paper, when the invoicing currency became endogenous choice, an increase of the price flexibility in the dollar sector leads to a persistent increase of the output in the non-dollar sector as a share of the economy. So this is also an interesting result, which I'm going to comment on. So there is this literature which is clearly related on cryptocurrency and open economy macro, but there is a quite old literature, in which you can find similar result, but in a quite slightly different context. For example, on the stickiness of relative prices, there are this sectoral model by Aoki and my currency area model in which they found similar results. So it's not a surprise to have this result. One paper which is not much mentioned in the literature on currency invoice, which I think is one of the precursors of this literature, is this paper by Eduardo Loyo. I think it's on Journal International or Journal on Monetary. Is on imaginary money. It's like actually a paper in which you choose which unit of account setting their prices, and this is exactly, it's done in a static context, but is very similar in the flavor of all this literature that there is also now on invoicing currency. And I think it's worth citing that. So let me comment on the interaction between the two money properties. So medium of exchange and unit of account. And here, they in the paper, they interact in a bit in a mechanic way, as I see. So the exchange rate follows a random walk, but this looks like a fact rather than a result that depends on policy. In a sense, we know, and we've been working also with Harald. We have a common co-author here on the fact that policy implies a different path of the exchange rate eventually. So this result of a random walk is not the end of currency substitution. It say, well, if the two currencies coexist, then you get this result. But depending on the policy of the currency, there can be different outcome. And in particular, there can be outcome in which you use only one currency or another because you have this perfect substitutability. So there can be corner solution. So those are interesting because they depend on policy. And so here, at the end of the day, you are asking how the random walk process affects policy. But then the question should be how policy affects adoption of a currency as a medium of exchange. So what is key, here for the adoption or not of a currency as a medium of exchange is the specification of monetary policy. So we can take this result, going from the random walk to making analysis of monetary policy. There is a feedback effect which goes from monetary policy to the adoption of a currency. I think this is quite important. So, and indeed, it could be possible that one of the currencies is not adopted as a medium of exchange, and therefore the exchange rate is not a random walk, right? Now, so this is one step, in a sense, interaction between medium of exchange rate property and policy. The second is what are the implications of the adoption of a currency as a medium of exchange for the invoicing currency, right? So what is the linkage there? So is it possible that some currency is not adopted as a medium of exchange and instead is used, or vice versa? Instead, if a currency is adopted, is much used as invoicing currency, right? And I guess that should be the case, right? The more perhaps you use that, then the more you adopt. But actually here, there is a disconnection, as I said before, between setting prices in a currency and then the settlement of the payment. So that's, I think, is something to explore. And eventually, how the adoption of a currency or another in the endogenous invoicing model affect the currency to which you want to invoice, right? So, and I see a lot of feedback effect here between policy, medium of exchange property, and price setting behavior. So this interaction, I think, is something that can be worked out more in the paper. And I suspect that obviously everything is going to depend on the monetary policy of the various issuer in an important way, which at the end will have a feedback effects on the way government currency policy is implemented. And this is not model, in a sense. We take this random walk process at the end as a fact, but not as a result. So let me go to the QCurrency example, in which, and correctly, and I think in a nice way, the paper focus on this example in which you have a two currency and fraction of firms setting prices in one currency, the government currency, and the other in the let's say cryptocurrency. So this is the Phillips curve you get in the government currency. And you can see that there is an output gap and there is a term of trade effect, okay? And in the other sector, in the other currency, you have a similar curve, proportional to this in the same way to the output gap, but then inversely related to the term of trade. So you see that the term of trade, is able to switch allocation resources across the two sectors. Now, when you aggregate and you use the weight of each sector, then you obtain an aggregate, a concept of a sort of CPI inflation rate, okay, in government currency. So here you have the conversion with the exchange rate in the other currency. So if you define this aggregate inflation rate, then you're able to get this aggregate supply equation. And at the end of the day, you can work with this aggregate supply equation in which you notice, well, this is standard and is the new Keynesian closed economy. But interestingly here, there is this sort of cost push shock coming from the exchange rate, which is a random walk under the assumption that there is perfect adoption of both currency as a medium of exchange. So I think this is fine. And the paper is about how this shock then affect policy, right? Now, the issue is when I think about policy, I'm thinking about whether this is the relevant inflation rate for a central bank in this context, right? So, and should the central bank target that aggregate inflation rate? And if we look from a welfare perspective, what matters in this kind of model are the distortion due to price rigidity, and these are captured by the inflation rate in the QCurrency, right? So, and where rigidity are the same across currency, it could be relevant more, instead of stabilizing this type of inflation rate, to stabilize this inflation rate, in which you weight the two inflation rate in the two currency. So that would be, in my view and my knowledge, the welfare relevant inflation rate in the case of similar price rigidity across the two currency sector. And when you assume this, then you end up with an aggregate supply equation, which is of the standard form, so which is independent of exchange rate variation. So in my second comment is, when you do an analysis here and when you ask what is the relevant inflation rate for the central bank and government currency to target, in one way you could get this shock to be important. In another way, you will get back to the standard new Keynesian model, I guess. So in which these exchange rate shocks are not relevant actually to be reacting. And this could be a result, in a sense. It could be like a result and say, okay, we have this economy, we have these shocks coming from Bitcoin, volatility, whatever, but those are shocks we shouldn't care about. Now, last comment, and I think is a section I like a lot, is this on the endogeneity of invoicing currency. And here there is this main result, which I was a bit puzzled, but I think it needs to have more intuition, is that the size of the non-dollar sector increases when there is more price flexibility in the dollar sector. And so what is the intuition here? That's my question. So, and I go in the direction to say, okay, suppose one sector has really fully flexible prices and the other is sticky prices. Would it be the case that firm will choose to set prices in the currency of the flexible sector? So that's my intuition. So there are less distortion. There is in some way, less, you have to take into account less stuff because everything is going to work in a flexible price case. So why do you want to set your prices in the other currency which has rigidity? So I don't know. So working in this limiting case, I think we'll get an intuition, a sense of work on the case in which you have just one sector fully flexible. Would you really choose to go to the other, and for which reason? So to me, still, I don't get the intuition. Now, the second comment here and the last is the exogeneity of the exchange rate policy could be an important assumption here, to strict assumption. As I say, suppose that we are not in the case of adoption of a currency and the other is going to be adopted because of the policy of the issuer, then how would this matter for invoicing currency? So here there is not to keep this exchange rate as a random walk, but to ask, okay, this depends on policy, how the policy would make endogenous the determination of prices in one currency with respect to another. And I guess, again, this is something require a bit of more thoughts. All right, that's my comment, and I think it is a promising paper, and I'm looking forward to see more research on this topic. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, thank you, Pierpaolo, for your very detailed discussion. So before I turn to Dr. Xiet, we have about 9 minutes left. So maybe I can ask Dr. Xiet to quickly respond to those comments by Pierpaolo, and then I'll open the floor.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Pierpaolo. The comments are very nice and they make total sense. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for mentioning the papers on the new Keynesian models by Alki and yourself. Yeah, we'll look at it more closely. So for the endogeneity of currency choice, we were looking at the Gopinath paper on the currency choice. But yeah, it's good to know that there's this Loyos paper on 2002. Yeah, so we'll look at it more closely as well. Okay, so come to the model specification, and you are right that this perfect substitutability is the reason for the random walk. I mean, if we assume an imperfect substitution, then this random factor will just be removed. The exchange rate will be determined by the relative preference for the money and also for the exchange rate. But I agree with you that it's an important issue to answer, as in what are the implications of adoption and not adoption of a currency as a medium of exchange. I think that would be a good aspect to be included in the future version. And we should really consider an imperfect substitutability case where the monetary policy or other dynamics can really affect the money supply or the adoption of these digital currencies. Yeah. So yeah, thanks. And then also for the endogeneity currency invoicing choice, yes, we found it also quite puzzling that why firms will not stay in the more flexible sector. So I think that's just because of the McFadden's discrete choice model. When firms are given a chance to reprice, they'll just reprice to another currency anyway, I mean, at a certain probability. But there's perhaps something there that we need to look into, like the welfare effects or something that which we are not sure yet how to explain. I mean, how to find out a more sensible way to model the currency choice model. But I mean, definitely this will be a key agenda in the future version of the paper. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much for the comments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me open the floor for any questions. I guess Dr. Jinil Kim, do you have a question?
Yeah, so let me ask about the assumption of the perfect adoption of both currencies. So maybe it's related to the last point by Pierpaolo, but in what sense do we both currencies perfectly adopted? So for example, like in the United States, under the bimetallic regime, and both gold and silver were used. And also, yeah, my personal experience of being in Venezuela last February for a few days, and both US dollars and Venezuelan currency are used, but the exchange rate is far away from random walk. So when both are used, I don't think random walk is appropriate assumption. So maybe you should think more about what are you assuming by assuming perfect adoption, because that may be I think it's illogical, but you think more about what you are assuming by perfect adoption and the random walk. So because of that, I think maybe another appropriate benchmark to consider is that between the two monies, one is used as a unit of account and the other is used as the medium of exchange, which was observed in Chile, I was told, some decades ago. So maybe that's another benchmark you can consider. Maybe you can compare both and you can see the intuition of two money system. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Xie, you can respond first.
Okay, so yes, I mean you have the point. I mean, in fact, not all monies. I mean, all monies are not perfect substitutes. So yeah, here we are just going to an extreme case when we have perfect. But in fact, I mean, we should consider the non-perfect substitutability case to bring out the exchange rate dynamics more prominently. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah. Oh, can I? Ilio, can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Fantastic presentation and a fantastic discussion. Then also as Pierpaolo showed clearly, monetary policy should respond to the exchange rate, between the digital currency and the dollar, because they act like a cost push shock. That's fantastic. Then what comes to my mind is in actual policy sphere, people may think, central banks shouldn't react to the digital currency or exchange rate between the digital currency and the dollar. So my point is related to the Janil's point. So that maybe why I believe so is the very famous Kadek and Wallace kind of the indeterminacy between the two currencies. But so you are assuming that there are, two currencies are perfectly substitutable, but there's no exchange rate indeterminacy. So that I would like, I should read your paper carefully. What the assumption make the exchange rate determinate? Is it coming from the currency specific money utility, or then if so, I would like to know the rationale behind assuming rationale to have such kind of assumption. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Xie, please.
Yeah. So. No, so it still comes back to the perfect substitutability of the currency. I mean, okay. So in reacting to the digital currency sector, no, it's just a general assumption. I mean, the central bank has different options in reacting to different inflation. So I mean, sometimes people discuss whether the central bank should respond to asset price as well. So if we treat this digital currency as another asset price, then perhaps it can be one of the targets. Yeah. So the rationale behind this perfect substitution is just a simplifying assumption where we want to bring out the exchange rate. We want to see the exchange rate dynamics, the impact of exchange rate dynamics on the macroeconomics, because no one has studied this, and given that the digital currency market is so volatile and is subject to all the exchange rate shocks now and then. So then we thought it's meaningful that we just focus on these exchange rate shocks without any other source of uncertainty and see how the economics will perform. Yeah. So yeah, I hope I answer your question. Yeah.
So I think maybe my question is really bad, but how can you have the exchange rate determinacy in your model?
No, there's no determinacy. I mean, the exchange rate is a...
Oh, it's indeterminate.
It's indeterminate, yeah. It's a random, yes, yeah.
Okay, so any other question to the speaker? Okay, I have one, not necessarily question or comments. I guess your paper sort of motivated from using the digital currencies, but I actually don't see many times that you are justifying your model's assumption or different, sort of sets of different sort of calibration or different assumptions linking in. I guess only section 6, you mentioned that e-commerce and the use of currency as sort of motivation. I think it would be better to do as much as possible exactly which assumption is more realistic in your case, in your sort of world, especially the crypto or digital currencies. And in the conclusion, you mentioned stable coins. I think it goes into other sort of comments too. I mean, depending on which digital currency you're talking about, the exchange rate can be very different, ex ante, ex post. So I was sort of wondering exactly what would be the best digital currency that you have in mind in terms of currency competition from the central bank point of view, especially.
Yeah, I think the stable coin will be more appropriate for this model because it can be almost perfect substitution with the fiat currency, and it's also subject to different risks of the issuing organization. I mean, there could be a random shock in the currency. Yeah, so I think stable coin is more in line with the assumption of this paper. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If there is any other question, I think we can conclude the session. So thank you all so much for actively participating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.